Chapter 7, Visitor from the West. Part of the appeal of a growing Harley-Davidson motorcycle is that it can make a weak man feel strong. And Michael, Taz, Tasman, Little Beaker, Pooh Bear, Sandham had plenty of failure to put behind him as he rode up the pothole dirt road to Wiener Kellerstein's farm in June of 2003. If things went well, Sandham might finally become somebody. If things slipped in the wrong direction, another disappointment was almost too much for him to contemplate. Sandham's last shot at redemption was the Banditos. Sandham had taken a twisted road to get to the dirty white farmhouse on Aberdeen Line. He had served in the 2nd Battalion of the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry in Winnipeg from the age of 20 until 24. With no tours of duty overseas, it was a secure, if low-paying job for a young man with serious family responsibilities and ambitions that greatly outstripped his abilities. At 20, he had married a woman he had known for only 6 months, and by the time he was honorably discharged, there were 2 young children to support and a marriage on the brink of collapse. Sandham later claimed that his military work included time with the elite Special Intelligence Unit, working on top secret operations, and that he had served for a time in combat in Bosnia. Like his host, Wiener Kellerstein, Sandham liked to lie that he had been a commando with the Canadian Airborne Regiment before it was disbanded in disgrace. When Sandham left the military as a private in June of 1994, he immediately bought himself a business suit and said he was going to work for the Canadian Security Intelligence Service on top secret projects. A second career as a spy sounded impressive, but it was hard to believe his yarn was working for CSIS when he was selling vacuum cleaners on commission and living in a modest rented townhouse he could not afford. He was too proud for his wife Cynthia to go to work, but not too proud for her to accept donations from a food bank or borrow money from her grandmother. Sandham's next plan was to draw upon his military training to open up a martial arts school. He had taken some combat training in the military, but now held himself out to be nothing less than an international fighting phenomenon and a virtual one-man army. He pretended in pamphlets he had printed up to have black belts in several fighting styles, as well as a 12-0 record with 11 knockouts in full contact hand-to-hand combat matches in Canada, the US, and Korea. He wrote that he had achieved a 6th-degree black belt in Hua Ren Kempo and a 4th-degree black belt in Taekwondo, a black belt in Jiu-Jitsu, and a red sash signifying master status in Wing Chun Kung Fu. As if all that weren't enough, he wrote that he had attended many self-defense seminars throughout the world, hosted by such famous people as Chuck Norris, Steven Seagal, Bill Superfoot Wallace, and Dan Inosanto, the only person certified by Bruce Lee. And to hear him tell it, these were the least of his fighting accomplishments. He claimed his specialty was an unknown martial art he had founded himself, in which he anointed himself with the 9th-degree black belt and the exalted title of Grand Master. He described his new fighting art as a harmonious melding of mind and body and a modern-day warrior style, and promised to teach his students psychology, fear management, and sound tactics. The new sport was named after himself, Sando. Sandham wrote that world leaders sought him out to avail themselves in his unique understanding of tactics, weaponry, and bare-knuckle combat skills. Describing himself in the third person, he wrote, he is a VIP protection specialist and has protected such persons as former Chief of Staff General de Chastelain, former Prime Minister Brian McRowney, and Princess Patricia, and various other higher military staff. Mr. Sandham was also involved in crowd security during the Princess Diana and the Princess Charles visit to Canada. Illegal steroid injections made Sando Grand Master and Sandham look somewhat bigger and more powerful than his natural self, which still wasn't all that big or powerful. The drugs also had a predictable effect on his temper. Soon, Cynthia was complaining that he was physically and emotionally abusive, sometimes spitting on her and the boys. Not long after that, Cynthia moved out, and Sandham was ordered by the court to pay $100 a month in child support. By this time, the former couple was no longer on speaking terms. Among his last words to her, Cynthia later said, was a threat that if he couldn't have her, no one could, since he would kill her. Despite his impressive brochures, Sandham's plans for the martial arts studio didn't pan out, and in 1998, Sandham filed for bankruptcy. But while he might not relish discussing his financial failures, bankruptcy was something the No Surrender crew might have been expected to view sympathetically. But they would have been a lot less accommodating had they found out what had come next in Sandham's life. As he made his way to Celestine's farmhouse, Taz brought with him a secret that, if discovered, could prove fatal for himself or the club, or both. The secret would be hard to keep since Frank Lenti had already caught a whiff of it. He had heard from an old friend in the Outlaws that Sandham had already tried to join that club and had been turned down. And it hadn't been a difficult decision. Some people said that he had once been a cop. Former police officers and prison guards were automatically barred from joining any 1%er club. Lenti's friend advised him to carefully check that rumor out before accepting the Winnipegger into the fold. Lenti called Wiener Celestine in Iona Station and told him about the ambitious candidate for membership in the No Surrender crew and the troubling rumors that accompanied him. As the club's Sargento de Armas, or Sergeant at Arms, Celestine was responsible for such security assignments. "I'll pick his brain," Celestine promised. "I'll pick his fucking brain." Celestine seemed to be the ideal man to check out the membership candidate. A paranoid's paranoid, Celestine held himself out to be an intelligence expert with his business, Triple K Securities. If there was a member of the No Surrender crew with the skills to suss Michael Sandham out, it was Wiener Celestine. For a guy like Celestine, Sandham could have been a goldmine. Because Sandham had been a cop, maybe not a real cop at first, he found work as an auxiliary officer for the police force in St. Anne, east of Winnipeg, as he recovered from bankruptcy. But a cop all the same, particularly in the eyes of a 1%er. He then went to police college and finally seemed to have found his calling. His police college records noted he was an active team member and a cooperative and friendly. When he applied for work in the 9-officer rural East St. Paul police force, 20 kilometers outside of Winnipeg, Sandham wrote that he was profoundly influenced by his 4 years in the Canadian military, writing, "The Elimite sect of discipline was always their sect." Neither strong spelling or modesty were qualities East St. Paul was in a position to insist upon, and Sandham was hired. His policing career came to an abrupt end in October of 2002 after he appeared in a surveillance video shot by the Ontario Provincial Police Biker Enforcement Unit at the funeral of Outlaws Club member William Wild Bill Huckel in Sault Ste. Marie. At the time, Sandham had told his chief that he was going to Vancouver for the funeral of a relative. Immediately after the service in Sault Ste. Marie, he had requested a sick leave, then headed to the Outlaws Clubhouse in Woodstock, Ontario, where he hung out for a week. Once his chief caught wind of his lies, Sandham quickly resigned rather than face a firing. Despite the unfortunate connection to the Outlaws, the tiny force's chief still wrote a letter of reference for Sandham, which helped him land a job with the private security and investigation firm. This meant Sandham still at least looked like a cop, as he patrolled the Manitoba back roads as a not-so-glorified security guard. To Frank Lenti, it wouldn't have mattered whether Sandham was a security guard, a dog catcher, or a meter maid. If he had ever been a cop, there was no way he was joining the Banditos. Ex-cops and former prison guards were, by definition, untrustworthy. Such men were only after power, not brotherhood, and they'd crack if put to the test. Worse yet, they could be feeding information to their police friends. In the 1%er world, there were few people more dangerous than a lamb in wolf's clothing. So Lenti was more than a little surprised when he paid Celestine and Sandham a visit and found the Sargento de Armas relaxed and sucking on a beer. It looked more like a drinking party than an interrogation session. "I thought you were picking his fucking brain," Lenti said. "I'm about done," Celestine replied. Still, Lenti and another biker friend had their own queasy feelings about Sandham. He sat quietly and didn't interact with others at Celestine's farm and seemed like the kind of guy who tattled in school or sucked up to the school bully in hopes of manipulating him to fight his battles. Even his voice was squeaky, as if someone were squeezing his nuts. "Have you noticed when you talk to him he turns red?" Lenti asked his friend. "Yeah, he's hiding something," Lenti said. There was also something a little odd about Sandham's total lack of tattoos. Lenti's massive arms are like pictographs, telling stories of the rise and fall of clubs in Ontario since the early 1970s. They bear the devil ensigns of his old clubs, the Satan's Choice and the Diablos, cross Confederate flags for the Old Rebels Club, and a single Confederate flag for the Loners. There had been a 3-inch skull on his right forearm to signify his time with the Outlaws, which was transformed into a psychedelic inferno after he left the club. His arms also bore images of a dancing skeleton, a nude woman, triangles with the 1%er legend, and his own personal symbol, the baston or baton, representative of the club's suite in an Italian deck of playing cards. His right forearm featured a sombrero to signify the Banditos and the number 13 for the letter M, the 13th letter of the alphabet. The M stood for marijuana, motorcyclism, murder, and mother in the biker world. By contrast, Sandham's stubby arms were as bare as Lenti was suspicious of him. He would have to pass several tests before he would be allowed to ink the fat Mexican on them if the veteran 1%er had any say in the matter. Between sips of beer, Celestine offered to go to Winnipeg and live there for a while to further investigate Sandham's background. Lenti feared this would just mean more partying at the club's expense. "We can't afford that," Lenti said. The Banditos may not have had much, but they had the certainty of their rough-hewn fraternity. Whether a club has much to lose as a Hell's Angel or as little as the Banditos, the rules are the same. It is common practice for 1%er clubs to run intense background checks on prospective members. Some police officers grumble that bikers carry out tougher screening than police forces do on their own recruits. What happened when Michael Sandham came calling, however, was inexplicable. Boxer's friend, Wiener Celestine, was asleep at the wheel. From that moment, things would never be the same for the No Surrender crew.